So I recently saw a post on Reddit asking if Seventh-day Adventists could eat grain. More specifically, what kinds of grain Adventists could eat, because the person who posted thought apparently there was something restricted. And let's go over that. Grab the Bible in a second. Now, first thing I want to clarify is Seventh-day Adventists technically can stick anything in their mouth and chew it. You're not going to get kicked out of the church for eating something you shouldn't. And in addition to that, the Seventh-day Adventist Church really doesn't add any dietary rules that aren't already in the Bible. And honestly, most mainstream Adventists actually throw out some of what's in the Bible. So let's dig into it. We're going to start in the beginning. Flipping over to Genesis 1. And I'm reading in an NIV. Get whatever version you'll like. I don't care. They're all going to be similar enough. So we're going to start Genesis 1. We're going to start in verse 27. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So we're at the point where humans were just created. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Okay, cool. We got our marching orders. Verse 29. Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They are yours for food." Now, as a gardener, I run into very few plants that don't at some point produce seed. I've also talked to a nutritionist who speaks Hebrew, and he went back to the original version of this text. And what the Hebrew actually says, the word they use in there, that in the NIV gets translated to seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seeds in it, is green. It's every green plant. So, and you may see like a red pepper or tomato or something like that, or potato even, cashews, corn. You'd think those aren't green, they don't qualify. Well, when you grow these, you can look at any of my Friday garden videos to see some of the stuff in the garden. The way those plants survive is through photosynthesis. If you remember your elementary school science class, they have a chemical called chlorophyll in their leaves, which reacts with the sun to generate energy. And that chlorophyll in the leaves makes them green. So corn, the stalks of corn are green, the outer husks essentially form leaves around the corn is green. On a potato, if you've ever grown one, yes, the potato itself, the piece you eat, is underground and it's brown and white, but the plant itself puts up stems with green leaves. The red peppers and tomatoes, huge amounts of green leaves on them to get energy for the plant. And those tomatoes and peppers that you might be seeing that are different colored, as they're growing, they're actually green until they're fully ripe. So most fruits are going to be like that. They're going to have leaves that are going to be green, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. Now, there are some things that you'll see in the produce section of your grocery store that a lot of people think of as vegetables that aren't actually vegetables. For example, mushrooms. It's pretty much the only example. It's going to be mushrooms. Those don't use photosynthesis for energy. They also don't produce seeds. They're underground. You can grow them in a cave, and they produce spores, not seeds, to reproduce. If you happen to have a King James version of this, I believe that instead of using plants with seeds, it actually uses the phrase herb of the field. But essentially, we're talking the same thing.
Now, I realize somebody's going to say this is BS because the ancient Hebrews wouldn't have known about photosynthesis or chlorophyll or any of the other stuff. Well, they might not have known the chemistry, but the guy who actually was growing the food, the farmer who's planting the seeds and then growing the plants, harvesting them, is absolutely going to know the difference between a plant, or a mushroom, fungus that you can grow indoors that gets started from spores versus a plant that you have to plant out here in the sun. And he's probably even going to know what things like the jute tree back there need a lot of sun, what need medium amounts of sun, like this middle bed here with peppers in it, and what needs very little sun, like if I can point out the tomatoes over there. They don't like a lot of sun in Texas. The guys who grew these plants would absolutely have known that. And they also would have known what color they were. So they would have known, and just for clarification, basically all grains will be green when they grow. So wheat, rye, rice, corn, any kind of grain, you're good. They're green.
Okay, let's flip over to right after the flood. We're going over to Genesis 9, starting in verse 3. Now, this is God talking right. We're going to start in verse 1 for context. It's going to be a long video. God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." Kind of sounds like Genesis a little. "The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and all of the birds of the sky and every creature that moves along the ground and all of the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has the lifeblood still in it, and for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from every human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. In the image of God has God made mankind." So here we have the diet opening up. We're specifically allowing right after the flood. Keep in mind, we're talking the earth has been decimated. There aren't crops to eat. There's no plants because everything drowned. In case you haven't gardened, yes, you put a bunch of water on a plant, it will drown. I have drowned onions. I have drowned tomatoes. Actually, the fruit splits if you do that. I have drowned and killed the lemon tree. You put too much water in a plant, it will drown, and that's the situation we've got here. So we get this kind of opened up to go eat anything that moves, but take the blood out of it. Which honestly, for meat is kind of hard to do because our blood runs through the meat, and this is actually where most Adventists kind of deviate from the Bible, because I've seen Adventists eat rare steaks or blood pudding that's Haitian or Jamaican, I'm not sure. But there's definitely places where people will eat blood, and that's kind of common, and it shouldn't be. If you look at how Jews prepare kosher meat, they actually drain the blood out of the meat before eating it. Okay, we're going to flip forward to Leviticus. Now, for background, when Leviticus is written, we're jumping over 1,000 years here as I flip forward. This is written after the Israelites. I don't want to use the term Jews because Jews are technically from the tribe of Judah and they're one of the 12 tribes. But the Israelites have left Egypt. They're basically wandering around this area. It's kind of southeast Canaan. And Moses is giving the rules. Leviticus is mostly rules for the priests, but it's all sorts of information. Some of them apply to just priests, some of them apply to everyone. And this is kind of a case of that. So we're starting in Leviticus 11, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, so once again, we're quoting God. This is straight from God, not from someone else. Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on the land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof. You may not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof and is ceremonially unclean for you. The hyrax, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof and is unclean for you. for references, animals you see, say chew the cud, what's actually happening is they're regurgitating part of their food, chewing it a second time, and then swallowing it again. So that's what this chews the cud references. Okay, verse 6. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it is a divided hoof, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. So really, out of the meat you will find in a grocery store in the USA, cows are safe to eat. Chickens are safe to eat. Well, we'll get to birds in a second. Cows are safe to eat. Goat and sheep are safe to eat. And generally, if you go to buy some of that, it's not necessarily well labeled, but you can get either one. They're both safe. They both have a divided hoof. They both chew the cud. Okay, continuing verse 9. Oh, out of those mammals, pigs are explicitly called out as not clean, and rabbits are called out as not clean. You're not going to find rabbit in most grocery stores, but occasionally you run into people doing small-scale homestead where rabbits are one of the easiest meat animals to grow or breed. Grow is not quite the right word. But once again, they're not clean. Like, according to this, rabbits aren't food. If you want to grow rabbits to feed to your dog, cool. You shouldn't be eating them. Obviously, you can. No one is going to hold a gun to your head and tell you you can't eat rabbits. But right here, Leviticus 11, verse 6, the rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. Don't eat rabbits. Okay, continue to verse 9. Of all the creatures living in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that has fins and scales. But all the creatures in the seas and streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among the swarming things or among the other living creatures in the water, you are to regard as unclean. And since you are to regard them as unclean, you must not eat their meat. You must regard the carcasses as unclean. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be regarded as unclean to you. So, for most people, this is going to mean catfish. That's the most common fish in the U.S. that doesn't have fins and scales. This will also affect things like potentially water snakes, cottonmouths, water moccasins, whatever. Snakes, frogs, eels, all of those things either don't have fins or don't have scales. So don't eat those. But most fish, tilapia, salmon, trout, they all have fins and scales. They're food.
Okay, and somebody asked recently about caviar. Now, all these rules, instructions on what fish you can eat don't specify what parts of the fish or animals even you can eat. So, like for instance, chickens. I've got some chickens back there. There's the coop and the run, whatever. You can eat the chicken eggs, you can eat the chicken whole, you can eat the chicken breasts, you can eat the chicken wings. Caviar are fish eggs. So if the eggs that you're eating came from is clean, you can eat the eggs. If it's not clean, don't eat the eggs. Now, most caviar that's commercially produced and available, at least in the US, is from sturgeon. Now, whether or not sturgeon have scales is very, very debatable. The outer surface of most sturgeon is skin, not scales, but they have some bony protrusions on their back that some people will say are scales, some people will say are not. The biologists that I see online are pretty divided. I was hoping to actually talk to a biologist, a marine biologist, before I made this video, but I ran out of time. So maybe that'll be in a follow-up video.
Okay, continuing to verse 13. These are the birds you are to regard as unclean and not eat because they are unclean. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, hoopie, and the bat. So don't eat bats, don't eat hawks, don't eat owls, don't eat vultures. Again, if you're in the US, you probably aren't going to have the option to eat them. Several, like the eagles and hawks, they're all protected species anyways. You get in big trouble if you shoot one and eat it. And you definitely have to find them at the grocery store. But chickens and turkeys are fine, and that's the primary birds you'll find in a grocery store. Continuing on, all flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean for you. There are, however, some insects that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these, you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. But any other flying insects that have 4 legs, you are to regard as unclean. Again, this doesn't come up very often, but technically, yes, you can eat crickets. And my local grocery store, occasionally you will actually see crickets for sale. I know some people who bought them just so they could say they ate it and there was a bet going. Anyways, we'll continue. This gets kind of repetitive. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whatever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. So basically, if you've got to dispose of one of these animals, wash your hands afterwards, take a shower, wash your clothes. Get the blood and guts off you. Okay, verse 26. Every animal that does not have a divided hoof or does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. So once again, for modern Americans, that's pigs and rabbits. Worth mentioning, deer do chew the cud and have a divided hoof. So if you want to be a deer hunter, honestly, I'm not a fan of venison. I've had it like twice. It tastes kind of like goat. Actually, it tastes pretty much exactly like goat, but it's clean. Okay, verse 27. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcass will be unclean till evening. So that's your paws. Cats, dogs have paws. Anyone who picks up their carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. These animals are unclean from you. Once again, if you have to deal with the dog carcass, wash your hands afterwards. Of the animals that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. The weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, the chameleon, of all of those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whatever touches them, when they are dead, will be unclean till evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, kind of nasty to think about, its use will be unclean. Whether it is made of wood, cloth, hide, sackcloth, put it in water, it will be unclean till evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls in a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean. You must break the pot. Any food you are allowed to eat that has come into contact with water from any such pot is unclean, and any liquid that is drunk from the pot is unclean. So basically, if you have a rat die and fall into a pot, or like we don't use clay pots, so it's not really much of a concern. Most of the concern there is if you've got, frankly, liquid and nastiness coming out of the dead rat going into the clay, you can't easily clean that off with water. And if you've got a dead rat fall into some water, don't drink the water. If it falls into stew, don't eat the stew. Same thing with dead lizards and all the other stuff that we just mentioned. Verse 35. Anything that one of their carcasses falls on becomes unclean. An oven or cooking pot must be broken up. They are unclean, and you are to regard them as unclean. So once again, if you're cooking something and a dead rat falls on your pot, don't use the pot. Probably better to get rid of it and get a clean pot. A spring, however, or a cistern that is collecting water remains clean. If anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. If a carcass falls on any seeds that are to be planted, they remain clean. But if water has been put on it, the seed and the carcass that falls on it is unclean for you. Self-explanatory. If the carcass of one of these nasty animals, a lizard or a rat, falls on your food, don't eat the food. The exception being seeds. If a dead rat falls into your grain, you can still plant the grain. If an animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. Every creature, before you get to verse 41, so that is basically if you're dealing with a dead animal, wash your hands, wash your clothes. You get blood on it, it's nasty. Just be clean. Verse 41, every creature that moves along the ground is to be regarded as clean. It's to be regarded as unclean. It is not to be eaten. You are not to eat any creature, turn the page, that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours. You may not eat it as unclean. Walks on all fours or on many feet, it is unclean. Do not defile yourselves with any of these creatures. Do not make for yourselves unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. This is basically talking about snakes. Lizards were already covered. Here we've got don't eat snakes. Once again, you're not likely to find them at your grocery store. I have been to one restaurant that served rattlesnake. No, I didn't eat it. I probably would have, but I didn't have the guts. Actually, maybe I did. I can't remember. I was a little kid at the time. Okay, we'll just finish the chapter. So verse 45, I'm the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, be holy, because I am holy. These are the regulations concerning animals, birds, every living thing that moves about the water, and every creature that moves along the ground. You may distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. And now if you switch over to Deuteronomy chapter 14, we've got a little bit more detail, but not a lot. So let's just quickly hit. Let's hit it. So Deuteronomy 14. Starting in verse 3, do not eat any detestable thing. These are the animals you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, the mountain sheep. You may eat any animal that has divided hoof and chews the cud. However, those that chew the cud or have a divided hoof you may not eat, specifically the camel, the rabbit, the hyrax. It doesn't say specifically, sorry, I just added that word. Although they chew the cud, they do not have a divided hoof and are ceremonially unclean for you. Verse 8, the pig is also unclean, though it has a divided hoof and does not chew the cud. You are not to eat it, because eat their meat or touch their carcass. All of the creatures living in the water, you may eat any that has fins or scales, but any that does not have fins and scales, you may not eat. For you it is unclean. You may eat any clean bird, but these you may not eat: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, the black kite, any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the cormorant, the stork, any kind of heron, the hopi, and the bat. All the insects that are unclean for you, you may not eat them, but any winged creature that is clean you may eat. And we saw in Leviticus kind of a definition of what's clean for insects. Verse 21, do not eat anything you find already dead. You may give it to the foreigner residing in any part of your town, and they may eat it, or you may sell it to another foreigner, but you are a people holy to the Lord your God. Do not cook the young goat in its mother's milk. That last one, if you're cooking goat, don't cook it in milk. The end. That's simple and pretty straightforward. But as you can see, the Adventist dietary rules and recommendations are really right out of here. Now, there's an argument for being vegetarian. If you go look up studies on this, the thing that, sorry, I'm going to put the bottle down. The one that kind of stood out to me was the AHS2 study in California, done in Loma Linda, where there's a big enough population of Adventists to get real data. And their data does show that a vegetarian diet is slightly better. And if we look through this, the original human diet in Genesis, right when God created humans, was vegetarian. It was green plants. And meat get added later, and then in Exodus and Leviticus, we clarify what specific meats can be eaten. Anyways, if you look at in details on the AHS2 study, what you'll find, and this is the one that kind of kicked it for me, is the prostate cancer numbers for vegetarians are actually better. If I remember off the top of my head, it was a 30% reduction in your prostate cancer risk for lacto-ovo vegetarians, which are basically people who don't eat flesh but do eat eggs and cheese, like me. And then you get about a 40% improvement for vegans. And then here's the crazy one. You get about a 50% improvement for pescatarians. Those are people who don't eat the flesh of animals, but will eat the flesh of fish. Honestly, I'd like to do that. I just hate eating fish. So there is some arguments for a vegetarian diet actually being valuable, which the Adventist Church will recommend, though the vast majority of Adventists aren't vegetarians. My guess is worldwide it's probably close to 80 or 90% aren't vegetarian. My experience in the US is it's probably close to 70% that are not vegetarian. But I want to be clear that the rules we just read out of the Bible aren't for Seventh-day Adventists. They're for humans. If you're a human, these apply to you. These aren't special rules for Seventh-day Adventists. It may just be that Seventh-day Adventists tend to follow them better than most other people, but you got your rules right here from God. Do what they say, or frankly, don't. It's the skin off my nose. But I recommend you follow them.